Good afternoon, everybody. I am Yvette Pearson. I'm an Associate Dean in the School of Engineering at Rice University. And on behalf of AAAS, I'd like to welcome you to this webinar, which is titled Untangling Knowledge Generation and Evaluation in STEM Proposals. Before we dive in, the program officers at NSF has asked us to be sure to pass along a very important message to you, and that is that they have changed the submission deadline because of the coronavirus crisis. So the due date for STEM proposals this spring has been revised. It is now April 22nd, 2020 at 5 o'clock p.m. your local time if you're submitting a proposal. And so be sure to visit the STEM solicitation for more information. And also NSF has set up a website for COVID-19 to give you information on their actions in response to this crisis. And if you download the resource document, there's a PDF of these slides that's available as part of this webcast, and you'll be able to access the links to both the STEM solicitation and the NSF COVID-19 website. I also want to acknowledge that the material I'll be presenting today is based upon work that the NSF has supported under grant number 1708329 to Rice University. It's an STEM capacity building workshop that was designed to help PIs in their submissions of Track 1 and Track 2 proposals to the STEM project. So the material that I share and the opinions and findings that I share throughout are my ideas, my recommendations, and they do not necessarily reflect the views of the National Science Foundation. The objectives for today are to help you to be able to distinguish between knowledge generation and evaluation in your STEM proposals, to help you to identify the expertise needed to fulfill both the research or knowledge generation and evaluation roles for your projects, to identify those elements that make for strong evaluation and knowledge generation plans in your proposal, and to develop effective dissemination plans for disseminating your project results to interested audiences. So one question I'd like to pose before we jump in, and throughout the presentation today, we will have different polling questions, some of which will be answered on screen in a multiple choice format, and some of will be more open-ended, and you'll be able to provide your responses as open-ended responses in the attendee question section of your screen. So this first one is actually a multiple choice question, and we'd like to ask, is the evaluator part of the STEM project team? And so if we can go ahead and get you to use the polling options that you should see live on your screen, I want to get your quick answer to that question. And I think we'll give a couple of additional seconds for people to respond. Yes, no, or I'm not sure. Is the evaluator part of the STEM project team? And if we could see those results. Okay, so I will go ahead and move forward. The answer to that question is actually no. The evaluator is not part of the STEM project team. And I wanted to take this minute because I understand that there are a lot of new prospective PIs on the call, and I want to make sure that the roles of the project team members and the requirements from NSF are very clear because that's going to really shape what goes forward from this point on. So the project team is required to be led, and this is for track one and track two proposals specifically. The project team has to be led by a PI who is a faculty member currently teaching in one of the eligible STEM disciplines. And when you look at the STEM solicitation, you will see what those disciplines are. In addition, for the project team also has to have co-PIs or other senior personnel who fulfill very distinct roles. One is a STEM administrator, and then the other is a researcher. And that researcher is someone who has expertise in educational, discipline-based educational, institutional, or similar areas of research. And we'll dive into those requirements a bit more later on in this webinar. The STEM administrator, the image that I have on the screen here shows somebody connecting two cords. And that's because I like to think of these co-PIs or other senior personnel as connectors. The researcher is the person who's connecting what you're doing in your project to the knowledge base in terms of the existing knowledge base that your project is building on, as well as connecting your results to the knowledge base in terms of the knowledge you'll generate from your project. The STEM administrator is your connector on your campus. You will need somebody who has the administrative authority to be able to say, hey, if these certain things work, we will look at institutionalizing them on our campus. Or, hey, I know that if you have, for instance, a dean of your school of engineering, they may be able to work alongside their colleague who is a dean of the School of Natural Sciences, and to be able to leverage what each other has to offer, to be able to connect you with resources that already exist on the campus that you can build into your project as components to address whatever the challenges are. So those are the minimum required STEM project team members, PI, co-PI, senior personnel. You can have more. I think the cover sheet for an NSF proposal allows 5, so you can have more, but these 3 are required. And I mentioned the PI part specifically for track 1 and track 2. That person must be a faculty member teaching in one of the STEM eligible disciplines. That's a requirement for track 1 and track 2. For track 3, they can be the faculty member or the educational researcher, if it's appropriate to the project, can be the PI on those. But the gist of it is that the team has to be comprised of these 3 individual people. There are times when you have a faculty member who is a STEM administrator, and that's fine, but generally speaking, NSF would prefer to see distinct people fulfilling these roles. So because the purpose is different, the faculty member is basically the boots on the ground, so to speak, who's going to be more the hands-on in implementing the real student-centric elements. And as I mentioned, the researcher and the administrator are in different roles where they're making the necessary connections that are relevant. So you need 3 distinct people, even if in actuality, one person might actually wear 2 hats. And then external to the team is your evaluator. So your evaluator is this unbiased third party who can look at what you're doing in your project, be able to provide the input that's going to help you make improvements as you go along, and to be able to really evaluate the extent to which your outcomes are being attained. And again, we'll go into more depth momentarily with that. So I will point out that for STEM, and every program is different. So specifically for STEM, the evaluator does not necessarily have to be external to the institution, but they do need to be external to the project team, meaning that the evaluator cannot be someone who's a co-PI or other personnel on the project. And so just keep that in mind, and keep in mind that as the reviewers and as the program officers are looking at the person that's providing this insight for your project, they want to make sure that it's kind of that unbiased third-party eye on it. So suppose there's someone in your department who has evaluation expertise. You'll probably have to do a pretty hard sell to say that this person will be unbiased, especially if you've worked collaboratively with them before. So just be aware of that sort of thing. They do not have to be external to the institution, but they have to be external to your team. So one of the challenges in STEM proposal has been really clearly delineating research and evaluation. And notice I'm saying research. The solicitation says knowledge generation, but when you look at it, it's research because you're generating knowledge to publish, to inform the knowledge base on whatever aspect of STEM education that your project addresses. So please know that when I say research in the context of STEM, I am using it interchangeably with knowledge generation. So let's try to unblur the lines a little bit between research and evaluation. So we'll look at research first. When you look at research and evaluation, they differ in the audience that they reach, they differ in their purpose, and they differ in what the ultimate yield is. And so the knowledge generation part is focused on researchers and seeking to develop new knowledge or to contribute new knowledge to the knowledge base. And it's formulated based on certain questions and hypotheses. And if you're looking at the funnel diagram that I have on the screen, then when you get all of that, you put it through, you have these methods and analysis, and the result that comes out are a set of research recommendations that you publish to, again, inform the researchers. On the other hand, evaluation, instead of being focused on researchers, it's focused on the stakeholders. So you as a PI and your project team and your institution, for instance, would be the stakeholders. And the evaluator's job is to seek info to help with decision making. And again, that information will be based upon key questions that the evaluator asks, but those questions will be different questions from the questions the researcher asks. And I'll point out that a lot of the methods and analysis for research and evaluation, the methods in particular can be the same. Some of the analyses might be different, but what goes into them and what comes out of them, that's the distinction. So again, you're going in focused on the stakeholder with information, seeking information for decision making when you're looking at evaluation, and what comes out of it are recommendations about the key questions that you were seeking to answer, and you give a report to the stakeholders. And so as a PI, you would be looking for your evaluator to provide you hear the terms formative evaluation, and we'll talk about that more. But as you go through your project, there are going to be certain things that you're going to have checkpoints on and certain milestones. And the evaluator is going to give you that input to your team to help you make decisions about your next steps, and provide you with these reports that you can use to inform your project. So based on that, let me present the second poll question. and you should be getting the question on the screen. Is this a research question or an evaluation question? And the question is, how do students' post-graduation plans evolve from program entry through graduation? Is that a research question, an evaluation question, or are you not sure? Okay, so it looks like about 52, 53% are saying research, about 40 are saying evaluation, and about 7% are saying not sure. And so we'll take a step back and look at the question again. So the answer is that it is indeed a research question. So we'll take the next slide and look a little bit more deeply, and then we'll come back and revisit that question and point out why it's a research question. So this is another way of kind of untangling the two. Evaluation is specific to the project. It particularizes, whereas research generalizes. You're looking for some generalizable results that are going to help the education research community. Evaluation is designed to improve, and then research, on the other hand, is designed to prove something. Evaluation gives a basis for decision making, whereas research gives a basis for, or is the basis for, drawing conclusions. Evaluation is about what is valuable, whereas research is about what is. And then the questions that are asked. Evaluation asks, so what? Whereas research asks, what's so? And you remember with the funnel diagram, we talked about the key questions that are being asked being different. Evaluation will ask, how well does it work? And research will ask, how does it work? So if we go back to our poll 2 question, it asks, how do students' post-graduation plans evolve from program entry through graduation? And you're looking more at a what's so and how does it work sort of question. Whereas if you ask the question more like, what fraction of students, or did this program contribute to an increase of the number of students who plan to go to graduate school after graduation? That's looking at, okay, did we improve something with what we're doing, and how well did something work? So we'll go a little bit more deeply here, and let me preface by saying this. In this presentation, the overall goal is to help PIs to be able to better identify the expertise that they need to bring to the table in order to have a competitive proposal. It's not intended to turn a traditional STEM faculty member into an evaluation expert, nor is it intended to turn them into an education research expert. It's just to inform you of what those key things are that are going to make your proposal stronger, and being able to make sure you have the right expertise in the right place to lay these things out in your proposal. So I'll throw another poll question and ask, and this will be one of those open-ended questions, so there's a space for you to respond in the window, but then also on the right side, there is a place for attendee questions. I think it's near the top right, and there should be a red button for attendee questions. If you can quickly respond to the question, what is the first step in crafting the evaluation plan for your proposal? And we'll see where you are with that. And I do see that we do have other questions there, and I will stop in a minute and grab some of those questions, and then we'll stop one more time and then at the end. So thank you for your questions. Okay, I see some of the responses. Understanding SMART goals, identifying key questions, finding an evaluator, get your evaluator involved from the very beginning. And I'll say absolutely yes. Identifying your evaluator and getting them involved from the very beginning is the first step to crafting your evaluation plan. And I like to share this cartoon because I remember both as an NSF program officer and a reviewer reading proposals that made me feel like the PIs were doing what's happening in this cartoon. So there's a reporter who's holding his hands over his eyes, throwing a dart at the board saying, "Today I'm an expert in," and it's just whatever the dart lands on. And so a lot of times I think, I don't know, I've been in STEM higher education for 25 years now. So I think we have a tendency to think we can do everything without realizing sometimes that, no, sometimes we need other people. And so I like this cartoon because I like to use it to convey that we don't have to turn into this evaluation expert. What we need to be able to do is identify an evaluation expert. And as one of the comments read, get that person involved from the very beginning. Don't write the whole proposal and then call somebody 2 weeks before the due date and say, "Hey, I need an evaluator for my proposal." Typically, a lot of good evaluators are not going to go for that. So make sure you get them involved from the very beginning. They can help you a great deal with your project planning and with identifying those goals. Somebody mentioned having SMART goals. They can help you identify those goals and those outcomes that are going to be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound, which is what the SMART acronym stands for. So get that person involved at the very beginning. They should be the ones writing the evaluation section of your proposal. And which leads me to the next cartoon, because what happens is when NSF assembles these panels, they have the expertise that they need to make good judgments about the quality of the proposals. And they are most likely going to have people with evaluation expertise on the proposal, and they can read the proposal and tell if a PI, a typical STEM PI who doesn't have any expertise in evaluation, has written the evaluation plan. And it sounds like what this cartoon is conveying. And there's a guy at the table who's saying, "Listen, I'm no expert, but I still want you to listen to me ramble on about this for a while." And so a lot of times you'll see this in proposals that basically the whole evaluation plan is defining evaluation terms that those of us who are evaluators already know. And so we know that someone with that expertise didn't write it. So it's very important to get that expertise and get them involved very early in the project. When you engage that person, it's important for you to be able to communicate. First of all, share the solicitation with them if they're not already familiar. But it's going to be important for you to be able to communicate what you're going to need. And again, this is just to help you be on the same page with that language. And so in the solicitation, you'll see that the project should have formative and summative evaluations. And I love this diagram I came across years ago from Steve Wheeler's blog. And I actually made a little change to it. Being from South Louisiana, instead of talking about soup, I like to talk about gumbo. And I used to love my grandmother's gumbo, so I'd probably replace chef with my grandmother. So basically, for formative evaluation, you're looking at when the chef or when my grandmother tastes the gumbo. She would taste it and say, oh, well, it needs a little bit more salt. It needs a little bit more cayenne pepper. And she'll keep tasting it until she gets it just right. And then at the end, it's ready for us. And so when the guest tastes the gumbo is when you would have your summative evaluation, and the guests are the ones who are having that full final experience. You know exactly what the final product yielded. And so that's just kind of a quick and dirty illustration of formative versus summative. So in your project, in your proposal, you'll want to make sure that your evaluator addresses what types of formative assessments are going to be done, how those results are going to be used, are communicated to you, the PI team, but then how are you going to use it to be able to improve your project from year to year or whatever that appropriate time frame is. And that leads us to just kind of overall continuous improvement to consider for STEM projects. So one thing to consider, and you'll see a lot of evaluation plans, you'll talk about process evaluation and outcomes evaluation. Sometimes people use outcomes and impacts interchangeably. Some people draw lines between those. I'll use process and outcomes for simplicity. So process has to do with the actions you're taking and the activities that you're implementing. And you want to be able to clearly be able to not just communicate, but also have a way to assess what you're doing or evaluate what you're doing, how well it's progressing, and what room is there for improvement, because there's always room for improvement. And then on the outcome sides of things, this is where you have your results of your actions and your activities. How well of these interventions that you're proposing working for students? What impacts are they having on the departments and disciplines involved? What impact is it having at your institution? And then another part that people don't often think about with evaluation plans is how can we build the broader impacts that we expect from our project into our evaluation? So sometimes projects mention improving participation of persons from underrepresented groups, improve STEM education, STEM workforce development, partnerships. If you look at the solicitation and also at the NSF PAPG, where it discusses the merit review criteria, you'll see all of these different elements listed or examples listed for broader impacts. And so if you can think realistically about what your project is likely to impact, you can discuss that and be able to incorporate it or have your evaluator incorporate it into your evaluation plan. Again, these are examples from STEM projects that I've worked on or I've consulted on. Yours might be different. So this is not prescriptive in any way. And your evaluator will definitely know this, but things that go into your evaluation plan. So part of the STEM solicitation at the very beginning requires you to present some baseline data. So your evaluation plan, because you're looking to improve things at your institution, in your department, in your programs, it should make some connections back to that baseline data that you use to make the case for the need. And then you should have some well-defined outcomes and metrics. So what are you going to use to determine whether or not what you're doing is successful, or formatively that you're on the right track, on track to be successful? Your evaluator should mention the types of instruments being used or developed, and then what types of methods they're using for analysis. And then again, going back to that continuous improvement, the feedback loop is very important. Now, some people might have a question, where do I find an evaluator? And again, this is not an all-inclusive list, but 3 places that I would start. Number 1, look on your own campus. If you have a school or college of education, or in your School of Social and Behavioral Sciences, or even in your institutional research office, you'll probably have people with the expertise to serve as your evaluator. Another place that you can look is with other colleagues that have had successful STEM education research or implementation type projects, particularly if they're NSF funded, because the evaluator will have a better sense of what NSF would expect to see in a quality evaluation plan. So especially those of you who are submitting track 2s and track 3s, you should already be talking to people who have been STEM or STEP PIs on your campus, even if they're outside of your department or college or school. So you should already be in communication with those folks. Ask them who did their project evaluation and how that worked out for them. And then other people who have worked on other types of educational research projects, most of them are going to require some type of evaluation. So if you know somebody who's led research experiences for teachers or research experiences for undergraduates project, particularly a site project, those are good people to reach out to say, hey, who did you use for evaluation? And then a third place to look is the American Evaluation Association. Their website is www.eval.org. If you go to that website, on the home page, you'll see a link that says Find an Evaluator. And so you can go to that link, search by location, by keyword, or other factors that you'd like to include. So those are 3 starting points for finding an evaluator. So I am going to hop over now and take a pause. I know we had some attendee questions come in earlier, and I'm going to go ahead and start to answer those, and I'll invite you to add any questions that you might have so far in the attendee questions box. So there's one question here: how do you define project team? Project team, as I was describing it and as described in the STEM solicitation, is the PI, co-PI, and other senior personnel. And so when I mentioned that the evaluator is not part of the project team, it's that evaluator cannot be PI, co-PI, or other senior personnel on the project. There is another question. Let's see. What happened there? Can the PI be a faculty member who is currently teaching in an STEM discipline and a researcher? As a DBER researcher, I fit both of these roles. As I mentioned earlier, there are definitely going to be people who in real life, I'll call it real life, wear all of the hats, are more than one hat. So in real life, the question here came from someone who's a discipline-based education researcher who is also teaching in an eligible STEM discipline. There are some faculty members, like I mentioned, who are also administrators, whether department chairs or associate deans or what have you. NSF is going to prefer to see a distinction between those roles in the project. And so your proposal would be much stronger if you have 3 distinct people filling the PI the educational researcher, and the STEM administrator roles. And I think that question is about the same. Can the person who is the researcher also be the evaluator? And the answer to that is going to be no, because remember, the researcher is a part of the project team. The evaluator has to be external to the project team, although not necessarily external to the institution. And this question gets to more about the untangling research and evaluation. What if a how so question is one of the questions that the project team needs answered for informing the program? There are some questions that are definitely going to blur the lines between research and evaluation, and I don't think that we can fully unblur some of those, like a how so question. So I would say I would have your researcher and evaluator, because you're bringing them both in at the very beginning. Let them have a conversation and decide how to best address that. One of the things that I'm going to mention probably more later is that it is not uncommon for data collection to involve both research and evaluation. For instance, if there is a survey that's going out to participants or to all of the students in the department, rather than have two different surveys, one for research, one for evaluation, it's not uncommon for the researcher and evaluator to work together to come up with an instrument that they can just do one launch and ask questions that they'll each use, and that helps with just not contributing to survey fatigue or assessment fatigue, period, whether it's surveys or interviews or whatever. But each person will have their distinct questions, their distinct data, and they will do their own analysis. And so, as I mentioned, with conversations early on, the evaluator and the researcher can have those conversations and untangle those things. So let's see. What evaluation budget does NSF expect if the evaluator is external to the institution, and is it based on a percentage of the project budget? NSF is not prescriptive in terms of what specific amounts that they expect for the budget. What they will expect is that the budget for first of all, that you have a budget for evaluation. In fact, in the budget section of the solicitation, they talk about having budget for evaluation. So they expect, first of all, that you have a budget, but then that budget needs to be appropriate to what is being proposed in terms of evaluation. So that's for the PI, that's for the team and the evaluator to work out. Now, it is, and I presented the three places to find an evaluator in the order I did for a reason, because you do have a little bit of upfront savings if you start with someone on your campus. And I know as an evaluation consultant, I'm probably shooting myself in the foot by saying that, but as an evaluation consultant, I'm going to charge overhead, and then you're going to put me in the consultant box, and part of your overhead is going to get tacked on, and it does start to feel a little heavy on the budget. But those things can usually be worked out. As you all know, at least 60% of the total budget you're requesting has to go directly to scholarships, line F1 of the budget worksheet. So you have 40% left for project administration, and that includes all of your activities, your faculty salaries, your evaluation, your research, and everything. So there's no prescriptive expected rule of thumb from NSF on that. They're just going to want to see what's proposed aligns with the budget. I'll tell you, for one of the projects that I'm evaluator on, and it's this let's see, one of the STEM projects, yeah, that I'm an evaluator on. I think the budget is around 6 to 7% of their total budget. Again, that's not a hard and fast rule of thumb, and that might require some negotiation. I will tell you, however, especially when dealing with an external consultant, you're not going to get a robust evaluation for $2,500 a year. And so when the expectations that are written up in the proposal and the budget don't match, that's not going to review well. So just keep that in mind. In the case that I'm giving you, I am external to the institution, and then there is some travel related for some in-person data collection. If the if they would not have had room in their budget, the first thing I would have taken out was the in-person travel for data collection, and that would have helped me negotiate it down some. But they had room in their budget, so that kind of gives you a sense. But again, it's not hard and fast. And I will take a man. A lot of good questions here. I'm trying to pick here. So this is a question for a different audience member, but I think it'll be helpful to the PIs as well. What should you do as an evaluator if the PI expects you to do the research part and does not understand the point of evaluation? First of all, I would see if they would take some time to listen to the recording of this webinar, and hopefully that will help them delineate it. And then maybe you could work along with them to help them identify somebody with the expertise, and then you guys can meet as a team to shape the project from there. So we're going to still hang on to these questions. We'll have another Q&A period coming up shortly, and then at the very end. So thank you for all these great questions. All right. So now we're going to hop over to knowledge generation and talk about that a little bit. So knowledge generation considers the part about how you're going to advance knowledge. And I have that highlighted in red because it ties very closely to the intellectual merit criteria from NSF. But then because of the nature of the STEM program, it also ties very strongly to the broader impact. And some of that will come up later. But so first, we'll think about how your project advances knowledge about retention and student success, transfer from 2-year to 4-year colleges, if that applies for your project, different academic and career pathways for the students, their degree attainment, the STEM workforce development, and in general, low-income students in STEM fields. And so when you're writing your project, if you've read the solicitation, you'll notice that these bullets came directly from the STEM solicitation. So it's going to be very important for you to make connections between what you're proposing to do in terms of your activities and interventions and what you're proposing to study. Make sure that they tie back to those STEM programmatic elements. And so as you're doing this, and again, this should be your educational researcher, but you're working together, but they have to consider the current and future knowledge base. So you'll see in the STEM solicitation as well as other educational research solicitations, the need for the project to be knowledge-based and knowledge-generating. And so you want to think about how, to the degree to which your findings from your research are going to be generalizable. Who else is going to care about this? The needs of the institution and program, because you want to make sure that what your approach or what you're trying to do is really addressing a need on your campus. That helps you also with institutional buy-in because I should say institutional commitment. Because if you're solving something that's a priority that your provost and your president has addressed, you're going to have the support that you need to make it successful. And not only that, the things that you do, if it works well for your program, it may be more easily institutionalized, whether it's at the school or the college or at the institution level. And then when we talk about it being knowledge-based, that knowledge can come from existing evidence on teaching and learning, whether it's something you've done on your campus before or something in the literature. What works? We learn a lot from what we see that works, but we also learn a lot from what we've seen that doesn't work. And I'll go back to people who are submitting Track 2 and Track 3 proposals. One of the requirements in the solicitation is that your project has to tell your proposal has to tell how your project is being informed by previous efforts, not just if you had something to do with it, but if you are in the biology department and civil engineering had an STEM project 4 years ago, you're expected to tell how you're applying lessons learned from that. So again, that can be done in the context of what worked well and what didn't work. So, hey, this didn't work well in that context. We're going to try to tweak it in this way and see if it works better here. Or, you know what, they tried this about 5 different times. It didn't work, so we know not to go down that road. So think about how these things are informing your particular project. When you are writing the proposal, the tendency, I think, for a lot of PIs is to throw everything but the kitchen sink into the STEM proposal in terms of that section that says, I think it's activities on which this project builds. We'll go out and grab every support program, every tutorial program, everything on our campus and write about it in this proposal. And that is not as effective as saying, here are the 1, 2, 3 challenges we're trying to address. Here are the existing programs that have had success in addressing those in different contexts. And here's how we plan to use it and study it for what we're doing. Or maybe it's not something at your institution. Maybe it's something another institution did and you said, oh, you know what? That might work here. We want to try that here. That's what STEM is about, adopting or adapting evidence-based strategies. And in doing that, don't forget to provide the evidence. What is the evidence? And it could be curricular or co-curricular. Is it something with internships? Is it something with research experiences? Is it something with professional development or so forth? What is it that you're planning to address, and how are you going to make those connections to the need that you identified early on in the proposal? So, again, before we hop into the research in the proposal, remember that that researcher team member is a connector. They connect the project, your project, to the knowledge base, to the existing knowledge base, and to the whatever your project is going to contribute to the knowledge base. So again, it's about adopting or adapting and then studying how these evidence-based strategies work in your context. And notice the note here is that you're not developing something new, okay? You're adopting or adapting. And then they're going to pose research questions that are guided by theory. And again, that will be based on your unique context and what it is that you are addressing in your project. And just like I said that the evaluation piece requires expertise, the knowledge generation piece requires expertise, and that's why the solicitation is very specific to say that the person doing this and leading this needs to be an educational, discipline-based educational, social behavioral, or institutional researcher. And so you need to make it clear in your proposal and through their bio sketches, which will be part of your proposal, that they have the expertise to fulfill this role in the project. So in the proposal, what are you going to include in terms of knowledge generation? Well, first thing, you got to have some research questions. So tell the readers what you're seeking to learn more about, and in doing that, identify the gaps in the literature. Remember, the researcher is the connector, so they know what the literature says about the challenge that you're addressing, and they know what questions remain. And so being able to identify those gaps helps strengthen your proposal. And then having a research plan that lays out how those questions will be investigated. Now, of course, they're not going to be able to write a 15-page research plan because you have a lot of stuff to cover in that 15-page project description. But you should have a substantive enough plan for the readers, which would be the reviewers and the program officers, to know that you do have a plan for investigating the questions. You do know who your populations are. You do know the methods that you're going to be using, and they can make a judgment about how appropriate they are. And then, again, connecting to the needs. You don't want to have a research plan that has nothing to do with the needs that you identified early on in the proposal. You have to have those connections. So the other part I like to address here is what goes where, because there are some redundancies in the STEM solicitation, but there are ways that you can address those so that you're not being repetitive, but you also let the readers know that that you read the solicitation, first of all, but then that you've kind of thought this out and you have a plan laid out. And so again, not prescriptive in any way. These are my thoughts and how I typically coach people on developing proposals. So in terms of introducing the research questions, so what are the questions that guide the investigation? You typically want to introduce those early on. That gives the reader a sense of kind of where you're going with the knowledge generation piece. So in the project objectives and plans section B, you mention them. You don't lay out your research plan, you just say that a part of this project will be investigating, and then here are your questions. And then when you get to the generation of knowledge section I, you'd want to restate those, and then that's where you will have that research plan. And so the next piece of it is, how will these questions be answered? By the way, these questions that I'm answering here are actually in the solicitation. So these are just my answers to questions that are in the solicitation. So how will your research questions be answered? And you answer that by proposing a research plan that tells your populations, your methods, and so forth. And you do that in section I of the proposal, the generation of knowledge section. And then you also want to be clear about why this is important and to whom this is important. Because if you're generating knowledge and nobody cares about it, what good does it do? So you want this really to be woven well throughout the proposal. You want to have something, in your face at the beginning of the proposal to catch the reader's attention, to say, hey, they're addressing something important here. And then throughout the proposal, you'll see elements of that just kind of built up. In your generation of knowledge section, you'll see it resurface in your broader impact section, because when you talk about what benefits this has to society, in other words, what benefits does this have beyond the walls of my institution, you're going to want to know why these things are important and who cares about it. And then you'll also address it in your dissemination, because they're not going to know about it. The audiences are not going to know about it if you don't tell them about it. So we'll pause there and do Let's go to poll question 5. I missed poll question 4. I want to go back and do another uh, poll question that distinguishes between research and evaluation. So if we can go to poll question 5, and I hope I'm not causing problems because I skipped that one poll question. The question is this: is this a research question or an evaluation question? And the question is, to what extent are scholars successfully completing BS degrees in engineering? The response choices are research, evaluation, or I'm not sure. I'll give you another couple of seconds. And if you finish responding and you have other questions, you can go ahead and type questions into the attendees' questions, and we'll answer a few more of those before moving to the next section. Okay, so let's see if we can look at the results. To what extent are scholars successfully completing BS degrees in engineering? Research, evaluation, or I'm not sure. So we have about 74% evaluation and 25% research. So the answer is evaluation, and that gets to what extent are scholars successfully completing the degrees. So remember to kind of look at those distinguishing factors. Are we looking at proving something or improving something? Are we asking, what's working, or are we asking how well it's working? And so this is one of those how well and to what extent type questions. And so that's why it aligns more with evaluation. Thank you for participating in that. I know some of this seems like water from a fire hydrant, so I really hope you'll be able to access the recording and go back through it and maybe have a meeting with your STEM team to go back through it and, be able to have people's questions answered as you're refining your proposal over this next few weeks. So I'm going to go ahead and go to some more questions here. And again, if you have more questions at this point, go ahead and enter them in the attendee questions space, and I will get to as many as I can. So it says, can the institutional research office as an entity act as both the researcher and evaluator? Our office is large enough that it has expertise in both. If the current evaluation expert in the IR office was a co-PI on a prior phase of the grant, can they act as an evaluator for the current proposal? Ooh, they're asking a whole lot. So let's go back and deal with the first part of the question. Can the institutional research office as an entity act as both the researcher and the evaluator? And I will say as an entity, no, because again, you're looking at distinct team members. And again, this is my answer, and the best way to get something more definitive is to contact your NSF program officer. But this is my answer, is that as an entity, no, you'd want to have a person designated as this is our educational researcher, and they will be leading this investigation. And then this is our evaluator, and they will be leading the project evaluation or conducting the project evaluation. Now, can both of those people come out of the same office? There's nothing that prohibits that. However, there might be some eyebrows raised and questions asked if that if that evaluator can truly be unbiased if they work hand in hand, with the researcher every day. and the researcher is a team member and part of the project. So technically, they can come out of the same office, but you'll have some explaining to do to convince the readers that that evaluator is going to be an unbiased evaluator. Let's see the other part of the question. If the current evaluation expert in the institutional research office was a co-PI on a prior phase of the grant, can they act as evaluator for the current proposal if they are not a member of the project team? So if they were, I don't know if I fully understand that question. I'm going to tell you my interpretation of the question. So it sounds like the institution might have had a prior STEM, which, well, I guess it depends on how old it is or how long ago it was. That maybe the evaluator was a co-PI, but in recent STEM projects, they shouldn't have been a co-PI. And the question is, can they be evaluator on a current submission? And there's nothing that says that somebody who was evaluator on your prior project could not be evaluator on the next one. In fact, I think that that kind of continuity, especially if you're building from one project to the other, I think that kind of continuity is a good thing to have. But again, those kind of really sticky questions, especially, please, 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 I cannot stress enough, just shoot a quick email to your program officer and get an NSF answer, because again, these are my thoughts, my opinions, my recommendations, and they don't necessarily reflect exactly what NSF would tell you. Can the researcher and evaluator collaborate in writing papers for dissemination? Yes. The answer to that is yes. It seems that both the educational researcher and the evaluator have expertise in education. Is that correct? Yes, that is correct. So either again, your person that you hire for evaluation, because a lot of the methodologies are the same. You will have people who have expertise to be researcher or evaluator on the grant, and so just be sure to distinguish between the two of them. As a consultant, I have STEM projects that my team is the educational researcher consultant. I have projects on which my team is the evaluation consultant. And we have the expertise to do both, but our roles are very, very distinct in doing that. And you just have to make that clear in your project and who fills which roles. And let's see. One more that I can answer right now. I assume evaluators on a project are judged in the proposal based on their personal history of work. In essence, do we need an evaluator with a track record of working on grants? You know, every review panel is different. And so I like to make sure that we don't discount the fact that sometimes everybody has to have their first time doing something. So I don't like ruling out people who haven't done it before, but they certainly, if they have not had the track record of reviewing, evaluating education type projects like this, they need to show some evidence that they are capable, and that comes from their background and experience, but also that's maybe bolstered by having some type of group of advisors or evaluation team that brings the expertise. So I don't like ruling out people because they're brand new to something. But for a project, especially if you're going for something like a track 3, yes, you want somebody who has this is not their first rodeo for sure. And your proposals are going to be stronger if you have people with that demonstrated expertise, that kind of boots on the ground with project evaluation. Um, so so even, and I'll say this too, because I know we have a lot of first time PIs on the line. Um, the very first NSF proposal I wrote as a faculty member was an STEM proposal, and it got funded. And so a lot of people think that, oh, well, you'll never get your first grant funded, or it takes 3 times to submit. That's not necessarily true. But what was true, although I was very, very new to NSF funding, I had put together a strong team that filled in the gaps that the reviewers and program officers might have had questions about me as a new PI. I built the team around me that answered those questions to show that we can make this project successful. And so just sort of think about that. But so you definitely want to make sure the person has the background and expertise for sure. And the experience is definitely preferable in my opinion. But if it's their first rodeo, maybe they've done some more internal or programmatic type evaluations or something like that, and then maybe they can have support, whether it's an evaluation team, to bring that expertise that they're or experience that they may be lacking. All right, so we have just a few minutes left, so I'm going to keep moving forward. I took the liberty of extending a little bit beyond what AAAS asked me to do because I think it's so important to knowledge generation. And that is talking about dissemination, because again, if you don't get the results of your project to the audiences, your knowledge generation is basically, it was all for naught, right? So I want to talk a little bit about what goes into a dissemination plan. And I want you to take a minute and read this brief excerpt from a dissemination plan. Just take a minute and read it. After you have had a chance to read it, I am going to ask if you would enter in the attendees questions area, enter one element. So if you were reading this as a reviewer, what is one component of this dissemination plan excerpt that you as a reviewer would count as a strength? And if you could just enter that one component in the attendees questions section, I'd appreciate it. Okay, someone mentions the preparation of journal articles. Okay, another peer-reviewed journal articles. Specific outreach. And my screen, okay. Specific outreach to predominantly undergraduate institutions. Okay, so that starts to get at some audiences. I'll give a time for a couple more responses. Although the proposed topic is not that strong. Yeah, and I will take that, and this is an excerpt from a proposal, so seeing it out of context here and without the full plan, it definitely leaves a lot of questions. So sharing with AAC and you. Also, the website sounds like a great resource. For other researchers and so forth. So there are a lot of different elements that you are pulling out as strengths. I'm going to click to the next screen, which has some color codings. So you'll notice some things in red. The red will be basically the dissemination means. So I have in red the project website and also journal articles. The other thing that I have are things that are highlighted in blue. So the STEM education community that we'll reach through email listservs, and earlier in the proposal, we had talked about the specific listservs and targeted contacts as we talked about participant recruitment. Now, let me tell you, this is not for a traditional STEM project. This was actually a part of the dissemination plan for my STEM workshop project. So don't grab this and run because the audiences and strategies might be completely different from your STEM projects. But in the blue, we identified who, the audience. So STEM education community that we'd reach through those listservs and targeted contacts. And then we talked about the journals, which you guys pointed out. And then in bold black, we have what we will be disseminating. So when we talk about the website, what will be there? The summary of helpful guidance for developing competitive STEM proposals, strategies for creating partnerships and so forth. And then for the journals, we talked about a possible article topic that we thought would come out of the research part of our workshop proposal. And so I show you this example because when you think about dissemination, please think about your audience. Think about how you're going to get things to that audience and think about what you're going to get to that audience and talk about it. A lot of project proposals have, we're going to build a website, and it's this whole field of dreams approach. If we build it, they will come. Well, no, how will people know that you have it there? And you need to be able to express that in your proposal. You can publish. Everybody says they're going to publish in journals, which is great. Everybody says they're going to present at conferences, which is great. But what topics might be of interest to those audiences? Those things are excellent to pull out and describe in your dissemination plan. So when thinking about dissemination, think about how you're going to be active in disseminating and not just passively sitting back waiting for somebody to say, hey, I hear you got this project. What are you learning from it? So think about how you're going to actively get it out there, get your results out there. Be specific. And again, what's going to be distributed, to whom, how, and all of those things. In some proposals, again, STEM proposals, you got a lot going on, so you don't have a whole lot of space. But in some proposals, I might have a page worth of dissemination, and I have it by subheadings, by audience, depending on the nature of the project, because there are so many different audiences and different ways of getting things out to people. The biggest thing to remember is that if you write it as an afterthought, that's the way the readers are going to receive it. A reviewer, a program officer can very clearly tell when your dissemination plan is an afterthought. And the other thing I'll put with that is it'll be great to incorporate dissemination into your evaluation plan so that your evaluator can keep you on track with how well that's going, and then also build dissemination into your budget. If you say you're going to go present a paper about your STEM project at a conference and you have not budgeted to go to a conference, it's not going to be believed. So make sure you think about that sort of thing. And so before we get to our very final set of Q&A, I want to go through just some concluding thoughts that I hope will help you as you develop your STEM proposals. First, in the proposal, with respect to evaluation, and knowledge generation. Be sure to explicitly link your research questions and research plan to what you identify early on as your institutional or program needs and whatever your project goals and objectives are. And likewise, with your evaluation questions and your evaluation plan, make sure they're explicitly linked to those things. And make sure you get the right experts for the right task. And what you don't want to do is conflate project evaluation and research. And as I mentioned, there are some places where the lines might still be a little bit blurred, but working with those two experts, they will be able to help you distinguish between the two and clearly articulate what their roles are and what their outputs are from what they do. Don't propose too much or too little. Make sure that what you propose is realistic for the time that you have and for the budget that you have. And for the people that you have. You don't want to propose that you have a pie in the sky type of project, which looks good and looks like it would be great to do, but it might require 20 people and you have 5 people on your team. That's not going to review well. You have to be realistic in what you can accomplish. And do not list passive, mundane dissemination strategies without details. Make sure you provide those active, really thought out strategies for dissemination. A couple of resources I'd like to point you to on the research or knowledge generation side of things. In 2013, NSF partnered with the Department of Education and published the document Common Guidelines for Education Research and Development. It lays out the expectations and the definitions for 6 different types of research. And it recognizes that the research projects we have don't always fit neatly into one box. Sometimes the lines are blurred between the research types. But what it does is helps people kind of get on the same page with the language and the expectations around the different types of research. And so it's a great tool to use when defining that research plan that you will let your researcher write and not you as a PI if you're PI. And then the other document, 10 years old now, I can't believe it, but the 2010 User-Friendly Handbook for Project Evaluation is still alive and well. And again, as a STEM PI, this will help you with some of the language around evaluation and in conversations you'll have with your evaluation expert, so you can have a good upfront understanding of what's to be done. But make sure, again, that it is your evaluation expert that's writing that evaluation plan. And I always like to point people to logic models as a useful planning tool. You'll see it come up a lot of times in the context of evaluation because this is a tool that allows you to map outcomes from your project to the different components of your project, so your inputs, activities, and outputs. If you have room in your proposal, it's great to include this. If not, it's okay. It still makes a great planning tool. And so you can work with your evaluator and your researcher, and this helps to make those connections that I keep mentioning, making sure your activities and your outputs and your inputs and your outcomes, all of those things have those really rich connections that you need so that you can tell the best story possible to the reviewers and program officers. And then I like to point people back to NSF's merit review criteria. So NSF has 2 broad merit review criteria that ask a number of questions. So there's intellectual merit that asks the potential of the project to advance knowledge. And then there's broader impact that looks at a project's potential to benefit society or advance desired societal outcomes. And for each of those questions, you should be asking yourself as you're developing your proposal, to what extent the ideas and activities are potentially transformative and well-reasoned, well thought out, Are you assessing the success? And do you have qualified teams to pull this off? And do you have adequate resources to make the project successful? And that's both on the intellectual merit side and on the broader impact side. And so the strongest proposals are going to look at both of those. And like I said, for STEM, it's a little bit easier because the very nature of the project is very strongly focused in broader impacts. But still, don't forget to look at these merit review criteria and these questions. And if you can't answer these questions about your own project, remember the time and the challenge that reviewers and program officers are going to have trying to answer them. So with that, I will say thank you, and I will spend the next few minutes answering as many of your questions as I can. So if you want to continue to give us questions in the attendee questions section, that will be great. Also, I will point you to NSF's website on the STEM website. I know NSF has done webinars for the STEM program, and they have also published a set of FAQs along with the answers. And so you can go there to get the official, from the horse's mouth responses to a lot of things rather than solely relying on my opinion. And then again, when you get to those really sticky questions that you can't find the answers to there, just shoot the program officers an email. Program officers love to read high quality proposals, and so they're very open to answering your questions to help you with your proposals in that regard. If they can help you to submit something that's going to be responsive to what the solicitation is asking for. And you're very welcome. I see a thank you note here. Thank you. All right, so I see a question here. What is transformative actually? What does it mean? What are some examples? So I'm so glad you asked. I think potentially transformative is a bit more difficult with STEM proposals than it is with others because of the very nature of STEM. It's very specifically focused on low-income students with academic talent and potential entering or having success in matriculating STEM degrees and going into the STEM workforce or graduate programs. And so it's hard to pull out sometimes things that are potentially transformative. And by transformative, you're looking at things that are kind of game changers, things that are novel, things that are maybe new and interesting ways of doing things and exploring things. And one project that stands out to me from the time I was a program officer with STEM is a project that this team proposed, and it was funded, so I can talk about it because you can look it up in NSF's public database. But they looked at the students who they were funding and said, you know, a number of our students who fall within the definitions for low income with demonstrated financial need, they have to work X number of hours per week. And what we found in our preliminary data is that there's a kind of a sweet spot in terms of what we can offer in scholarship and other support that will be helpful or not, or we believe there's a sweet spot where we think we can be helpful with scholarship and other support. And so what they did was said, you know, if students are working over Y number of hours per week, we really don't have enough because STEM is still limited only to $10,000 per year for per student based on their need, which, by the way, again, my opinion, I think it needs to be changed. So after COVID-19 is over, if you all want to write your legislators, I'll throw that in. But anyway, they said if the students are working over a certain number of hours, we can't physically give them enough money to offset their need to work. And then we find that we have a group of students within a certain number of hours that we think we can really help. So the way that they presented their project was to be able to study what could potentially yield a new model for financial aid, to say how do we look at financial aid awards for need-based scholarships, and how we look at that in the context of student need and the hours they need to work, and them still being able to be successful in school. So they really pose their research part as a study of new financial aid models based on what they were learning from their SM scholars. And so that's one example that stands out to me as something potentially transformative. Thank you for asking that question. Can an associate dean who teaches be a PI, and this person would not serve as the STEM administrator? And the answer to that question is yes. For an evaluator who comes from the same campus as the PI, are they listed as other senior personnel, consultant? Is there another heading that the evaluator should be listed under? So if the evaluator, again, this person is external to the project team, so they cannot be co-PI or other senior personnel. Because they're internal to the institution, they also cannot be consultants. So where you would list that person is in section B of your budget worksheet, and they would be listed as other professionals. And that's because with them being internal to your institution, you're required to charge the fringe benefits and whatever your institution's overhead rates and everything are on that. So evaluator internal to the institution, but external to the project is budgeted in section B of the budget worksheet under other professionals or whatever that heading is. So there's another question. Let's see. The STEM solicitation states that project activities associated with knowledge generation should be informed by the common guidelines. Would you suggest the common guidelines is really something that should be closer to essential than to be considered? And so NSF, I find, is very sparing in its use of must. So must the guidelines be used? No. But are they a good tool? Yes. I know in a lot of my proposals where that have been successful in this space since the common guidelines were published, I do use the common guidelines in working with clients that I've worked with or people at my university that I consult with their projects. I do use the common guidelines. And so it's a great tool, but NSF does not require their use, but it is a great tool because it defines those different types of research and then tells you the types of the purpose, the types of justifications, the types of evidence you expect to generate from it, and all of those things that I think help you as you're writing your proposal to really lay those things out well for people who are reading it. So that's my time for now. I thank you for so many great questions, and thank you for being here with us today.